Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. We'll just get our cameras on. Thank you, everyone, again. So, welcome back to the October 25th through 26th, 2022 board meeting. My name is Song Oh, president of the board. Before we convene, I'd like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing pharmacy law. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. This meeting is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Government Code Section 11133. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in participating in the meeting must join the WebEx meeting. Information and instructions are posted on our website. As I facilitate this meeting, I will announce when we are accepting public comment. I have advised the meeting moderator to allow 3 minutes to each individual providing comments. This approach is necessary to facilitate this meeting. Before we get started, I would like to ask staff moderating the meeting to provide general instructions. Moderator?
This is the moderator. When public comment is requested, I will turn on the WebEx question and answer feature to facilitate this. Comments should be limited to the topic that is addressed in this specific agenda item. We will display instructions on the screen each time, and members may click on the question mark, typically at the lower right-hand corner of their WebEx screen, type comment into the text box, and click send for their request to be recognized. You may also choose to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon in the bottom row of your computer's WebEx screen, or if you're an audio-only participant, you can raise your hand by pressing *3 on your device. Each commenter will then be invited to unmute themselves, and they'll be given 3 minutes to speak with a 10-second warning. At the end of that time, their microphone will be muted, and then we will move on to the next commenter. And that is all for my instructions.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to take a roll call to establish a quorum, starting with Maria Serpa.
Licensee member present.
Good morning, Maria. Jig Patel.
Licensee member present. Good morning.
Good morning, Jig. Renee Barker.
Licensee member present.
Thank you, Renee. Indira Cameron Banks. I believe not joining. Trevor Chandler.
Public member present.
Thank you, Trevor. Jesse Crowley.
Licensee member present.
Thank you. Jose de la Paz. Don't believe Jose is able to make it today. KK Jha.
Licensee member present. Thank you.
Thank you, KK. Kula Koenig.
Public member present.
Good morning, Kula. Ricardo Sanchez.
Yeah, Ricardo Sanchez present, public member.
Good morning, Ricardo. Nicole Tebow. I think Nicole may try to join us later. Jason Wise, I believe, is not joining today, and I am here. And a quorum has been established. Moving on to the next agenda item 13, presentation on implementation of DSCSA provisions provided by the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. Members, I'd like to welcome Josh Boland, Associate Executive Director, Federal Affairs and Strategy, to provide a presentation on the DSCSA and upcoming requirements, the big November 23 deadline updates. So if he could be I think Josh is already on, so there it is. The floor is yours, Mr. Boland. Thank you for coming.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if possible, if the moderator could make me a host, because I'm going to be sharing my slides and then also a demonstration where I'll need to share a web browser, if that's possible. Wonderful. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. If somebody could give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, please. Wonderful. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for the opportunity to share with you some of the things that NABP has been working on as an association in support of our member boards of pharmacy, looking ahead to those to that looming deadline of November 27th of 2023. So a little bit about NABP. Of course, we are the membership organization for the state boards of pharmacy. We were founded in 1904, and what drives us, everything that we do is working in support of our member boards as you carry out your mission to protect the public.
This is the moderator. Josh, is it possible that you can get closer to your microphone? You sound a little quiet.
Yeah, is this better?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay, great. I will try to make sure I'm speaking up. Um, so again, as we look ahead to that November 27th, 2029, NABP as an association has been thinking about, you know, where are the boards as it relates to preparing for, what's coming in November 2023. Then, of course, we've had the national standards for licensure. What is the impact of that? But then looking ahead, how is it that regulators, that you all will assess trading partner compliance with the DSCSA in that post-November 2023 world? And then more importantly, and what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about today, is how, as regulators, you'll be able to request transaction information from trading partners within the quote unquote secure electronic and interoperable system that is the intent of the DSCSA as we look ahead. So several things that we've been very, try to be very clear in our messaging since we really started talking about DSCSA and looking ahead to November. Really, as of the summer of last year, the regulatory community and really the dispenser community, in particular the small dispensers, had not really been that involved in the solutions or the planning for this electronic and interoperable system. So our concern at that time was that, both of those groups, the state regulatory community and the small dispenser community, would be left out of the electronic and interoperable system. So what we've tried to do is to see if we could, work together with the states, with different trading partners to try to ensure that we could facilitate interoperability between regulators and industry, but then also more broadly across the supply chain and specifically for the small dispenser community. Obviously there's been a lot of work that's taken place. There are a number of, solution providers and standards groups that have been doing some really good work to help get industry ready for compliance. So we want to make sure that with whatever we do, we leverage existing standards and work wherever possible to achieve interoperability, so in a way that doesn't add any unnecessary cost to the supply chain. So how did we get here? So those messages you saw on the last screen are things that the NABP has been saying and really kind of banging the drum on, since September of last year when we submitted our public comments on the FDA's enhanced drug distribution security guidance. We also, and I'll talk about this a little bit, have conducted a pilot and worked closely with the state regulatory community, starting with a workshop in October of 21. We provided public testimony to the FDA, conducted our state regulator pilot earlier this year, produced our pilot report that sort of shared the results of what we learned from states and from trading partners. And then that's culminated in this proof of concept that we wrapped up last month in September, and then the announcement that we're going to establish this DSCSA interoperability network, which is what I'm going to be demonstrating for you all here today. So one of the key things that I think maybe gets lost in DSCSA, obviously, one of the initial things that happened was that when the law was enacted, that preempted any state-specific pedigree requirements. So now it refers back to, the three T's: the transaction information, transaction history, and transaction statement. And so those have been passed in various forms and fashions. But the key thing to think about with November 27th of 2023 is that FDA says that the system, that information must be shared in a secure, electronic, and interoperable manner. So what that means is that the transaction history that currently follows with each shipment of the product, that actually sunsets in November of 2023. So the transaction history that, a state board of pharmacy inspector could walk into a pharmacy and request at that time is no longer going to be stored in its current form. So what that means is that in order to understand who has owned a product previously, the inspector or the state would have to go back and sort of rebuild that breadcrumb trail to establish who the prior owners were. Again, because the requirement to store that transaction history with each shipment, that's what one of the big things that sunsets in November of 2023. So as we look ahead, this is, what the transaction history might look like today. This is sort of a high-profile one from the Gilead case that we all heard about earlier in January. So again, this type of document is no longer going to be, stored there in its current form at the pharmacy level. So then that begs the question: how, as a compliance officer or board of pharmacy, would you be able to conduct an investigation in this suspect and illegitimate product? And so that's really what's driven us forward here. So when we think about the DSCSA interoperability network, really the way that we're thinking about this is how can we facilitate that regulator communication and interoperability with trading partners? clearly, okay. Well, I'm not sure what else I can do on my end here. I'll see if there's a phone number that I can call into, and maybe that might work better.
This is the moderator.
Oh.
Josh, if you go to audio and video up at the top of your screen, go to switch audio and then follow the call-in options. Then you can call in on your phone and that might make the audio a little bit more clear.
Sometimes it's because of the network condition. So if you just call in using a phone, that usually resolves it. I know we literally just started the meeting, but we'll just take a 5-minute break so Josh can actually join it properly because his voice is now gone. So we'll just
so I just called in on the 615 number. If that's helpful to unmute me, and I could hear you through my phone.
Oh yeah, there you go. Okay.
You sound much better now. Thank you.
Oh wait.
I apologize, Josh. It looks like you muted yourself. You're going to control your mute and unmute button from your computer session still.
Sarah, I think
Got it. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, very good. I'm calling from my phone. Sorry for the difficulties, and I'll continue.
Okay.
So,
we'll be...
if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. I think the members might have stepped away. Sorry.
Okay. Right.
So, it's okay. Go ahead and continue. It's okay, Josh. Thank
Okay,
you.
very good.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. All right. So as I mentioned, with what NABP has been trying to do with our DSCSA interoperability network, it's really to see if we could help facilitate that regulator communication with trading partners. The goal here is that we would want to make sure that whatever we do is consistent with the uniform national policy under DSCSA, as well as FDA guidance. So the thought process here is that this would give us an opportunity to create a uniform request and response standard for state regulators, and also for incorporating in those DSCSA requirements and FDA guidance, but also creating a consolidated source for that communication. The other piece that's come up as we've developed this and have moved forward is we want to make sure that we're also, the information that we would be facilitating the communication of is confidential and proprietary. So we want to make sure that that's protected and that we have a secure system to help facilitate that. Again, the goal here being, to see if we could build a tool to increase the efficiency of investigations and inspections, but also make sure that trading partners and regulators can work quickly to get suspect or illegitimate products out of the supply chain. So what we did was in January, we launched our state regulator and industry pilot. This pilot included, the California Board of Pharmacy, as well as 5 other boards of pharmacy that participated in this simulation, where we actually simulated communication between state regulators and trading partners, and would go through the process really low tech using email and spreadsheets to try to help rebuild and sort of show that transaction history and what that would look like. So we had good participation from the manufacturer, distributor, and dispenser community. Both small and large organizations within each of those sectors were good enough to participate. And the outcomes from the pilot, really the big things to think about here is, there was consensus that NABP would continue to take the lead on helping develop those data exchange methods for tracing. So in an instance when a regulator needs to make a request from a trading partner to gather that transaction information, how does the, how would that process work? What information goes into the request? And moreover, what comes back in the response from the trading partner? Also making sure we have methods for ensuring that, state regulators are who they say they are, to know that they are actually a regulator that is authorized to make the request. And then, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, how the dispenser community may be impacted by these new tracing requirements. The final thing that we were directed to take the lead on from the pilot group is to look at developing a trading partner directory. And it's all good and well and fine to have data exchange methods for tracing, but if you don't know actually where to send the trace, that's where the system breaks down. So what we're focusing on with the directory is to see if we can effectively build, an electronic phone book that can help with routing these trace requests from regulators to trading partners. And that's what I'm gonna demonstrate here in a couple of minutes. So finally, our work, we're going to continue that collaboration and communication between the regulatory community and trading partners. I think this is one of those instances where, yes, the regulated population still have all their responsibilities to comply with the law, but the more effective we are in facilitating that regulator to trading partner communication, the safer the supply chain is going to be. And so that's why we've moved forward with the pilot and then the POC, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. And then finally, on our website, we also have the full pilot report, which participants can view at their leisure. So I want to focus in on the trading partner directory. And so how we're thinking about the TPD is that it's a voluntary platform that state regulators and trading partners can use to facilitate that communication. So it helps the state regulator know that they're routing the request to the right endpoints, so that way they can be sure that they're getting the response back from the participants that have actually owned that product. The other key thing that we're doing here with this directory is, I use the analogy phone book. It's not just the phone book. It also has the sort of electronic contact information and where to send these requests because, for example, Pfizer is a big company. There are many employees within Pfizer. How do you know that you're getting to the right person who can answer the question? And so that's one of the key other things that we're trying to do is also populate what key contact information should be shared or should be leveraged in this directory to make sure we're routing those requests effectively. So what I'm going to do now is switch to the demo. Can everybody see a web browser now? Yes? Okay. So here's the scenario that I want to walk through when we talk about how a state regulator might utilize this trading partner directory to route a trace request. So the thought process here is that NABP would be able to provide a smartphone app or at least a web-friendly app that would allow the state regulator from their smartphone or tablet, as they're out in the field, if they identify a product that they believe could be diverted or is otherwise suspect, that they can actually scan the 2D barcode on the side of that product to be able to pull in the information that they'll need. So those key product identifiers that the regulator is going to need to send to the trading partner in order for the trading partner to pull that transaction information. So to sort of show you how that would work, we've got a few saved product scans. So this is a scan of, I believe that is generic Lipitor. So we have this product scan where the regulator has scanned the product out in the field and they pulled the information. So we're actually going to initiate our trace request right from here. And so in initiating this trace request, there's going to be information about who the sender is. So this is what the state regulator, the state Board of Pharmacy inspector would see as they're trying to initiate their trace. So it has all this contact information for the state regulator. The trading partners, when they're receiving these requests, there is going to need to be some assurance that this is actually a state regulator that's making it. So that way they're not releasing information to an unauthorized third party or frankly a criminal who we've heard many stories about how there are folks impersonating Board of Pharmacy inspectors. So having a secure method for this communication is going to be very important. So this is some basic information on what information may go across from the regulator as to their contact details. But in this instance, we're going to identify that the nature of this request is that it's a suspect product. So we're going to say that this is diverted product. You could obviously include more detail or information there. But then because of the scan, these are the details that you would otherwise have to retrieve in order to initiate a trace request. Again, this information isn't going to be residing on a transaction history, so you're going to need these product details in order to initiate the trace request. So the scan automatically pulled over the lot number, serial number, the G10, the expiration date, as well as the NDC number. Now, the type of response that's being requested, and then in this instance, we want to know the transaction information. And now we get into the part where we're going to say, okay, who are we actually sending this request to? So because of the product scan, we know who the drug's manufacturer is. So that's how we know that we need to send this request for transaction information to the manufacturer. But we want to add another recipient. And so what we're going to do to add the other recipient is we're going to search that trading partner directory. That's that phone book that I talked about before. And so we know, because we were out conducting an inspection of a pharmacy, that that we know what pharmacy it is. But in order to gather the transaction information, we're going to need to add them to the trace in this instance. So we have, this is some actual data that a subset of data that we have from the state of Michigan. This is all anchored on the licensing data and information that we get directly from states. And so what we're able to do is we're going to pick on our dummy pharmacy here, our fake pharmacy, which is DEF Pharmacy. That's where we found the product, so that's who we want to send the trace request to. So we're going to save DEF Pharmacy to the trace request. And then for a future state, what we want to do is actually conduct the next trace in an automatic manner. So what this would mean is once we get the response back from the manufacturer as to who they sold the product to, and we learn from the dispenser who they bought the product from, the system would be able to automatically initiate that next trace to go to those next trading partners to complete the transaction history. So finally, we're going to go through and we have our attestation, and then we're going to submit our trace request. Now, as a regulator, you can see this is our dashboard here. And so the regulator can see that they've sent this request to ABC Pharmaceuticals. They've also sent the request to DEF Pharmacy. And now what we want to do is switch to what the manufacturer would see. So what is it that the drug manufacturer would see on their end? So the manufacturer in this instance, they're going to see that there was a product trace request that came across. And so in this instance, the manufacturer has actually already registered in the trading partner directory and they have an account. So they can go right to their trading partner directory account to be able to sign in and then view the requests that they've received from the regulator. So they can see that they've received this request from a regulator, the contact information for the regulator, the request details, so we know that this is a suspect product that the regulator is asking about. They believe it's diverted, and they also are seeking the transaction information for the product. And then these are the product details that, as the manufacturer, that I would need in order to actually go gather that transaction information. So, the majority of manufacturers, I should say all manufacturers, are going to have some sort of third-party or custom solution that they've used to store all of their transaction information, their EPCIS details. So the thought process here is that we would be able to, allow the manufacturer to respond directly to this request from within the trading partner directory. And they could go in and manually enter all this transaction information, the product details. No one wants to enter this manually. So what we're planning to do is to give them the ability to either have this request go directly to their solution provider in an automated manner, or so that way they can produce the transaction information in that manner, or they could get an export and have their solution provider export that transaction information so that way they can quickly pull that information out of their system. And then what we're going to do is upload. And then we can see that the transaction information automatically uploads here, which then shows that the seller in this instance was the manufacturer and the buyer was DEF Pharmacy. So DEF Pharmacy bought the product in this instance directly from the manufacturer. Now I can say that what we're anticipating is that when any trading partner receives a request for product tracing information to provide that transaction information, there's likely going to be an internal legal review process that triggers prior to turning that over. The DSCSA has some very specific instances in which a regulator can request transaction information. So it's for a suspect or illegitimate product. There are some instances for recall, and then also some instances where audits are being conducted and need to be able to prove that the trading partner has a solution to produce this type of information. So in this instance, let's assume this request has been reviewed, it's cleared legal, and now we're going to submit the trace response back. So you can see here, because, and this becomes important because there is a specific timing obligation that trading partners have to respond to requests from regulators. Manufacturers and distributors have to respond within 24 hours. Dispensers have to respond within 48 hours. And so what we have here is, we have this record to show when the response came in, when the request came in, and when the response went back, showing that, in this instance, the manufacturer did meet their compliance obligation under the law. So finally, now we're back to the regulator view, and we can see here that we do actually have a response back from the manufacturer. We haven't received the response back from the pharmacy, but we know that ABC Pharmaceuticals has responded and that we have the information from the responder, we have the transaction ID, the other product details, the information about the fact that ABC Pharmaceuticals was the seller of this product, and that DEF Pharmacy was the buyer of the product. So if we hadn't already sent that request to DEF Pharmacy requesting transaction information, we could actually create a follow-up request right here. So the final thing that I want to show is a little bit more detail about the trading partner directory. And this becomes important when you think about the requirement that you have to do business with authorized trading partners. And, to be an authorized trading partner under the DSCSA, for manufacturers, you have to register with the FDA. If you're a distributor, you have to have a state license and then also report to the FDA's licensing. You have to report your licensing information to the FDA. But then for dispensers, you have to maintain, again, a state license. And so everything around being an authorized trading partner really anchors on that license, especially if you're a distributor or a dispenser. So what we also want to do to help facilitate interoperability is see if we can leverage this trading partner directory to help surface ATP status. So that way entities and individuals will know, if they are actually doing business with an authorized trading partner. Moreover, if when they're getting a request from someone that is indirect. So if a manufacturer isn't doing business directly with a pharmacy, how do they know if a pharmacy is requesting transaction information to meet their obligations under the law, that pharmacy is actually an authorized trading partner? So what we want to be able to do is show how, we can surface authorized trading partner status here because we've been able to check the license of the state. So we're checking those licenses in a constant manner and are able to surface those here. So that way individuals and entities can be confident that that trading partner is actually authorized under the law. So in this instance, we've got a trading partner who their ATP status isn't verified. And that's because their home license status is expired. So under the DSCSA, this trading partner would not be considered an authorized trading partner. So again, what we're trying to do and what we've heard throughout the POC is just what can we actually do to help facilitate not only that interoperability and communication between regulators and trading partners, but also what we might be able to do to help support the small dispenser community. So what I just shared with you all, and hopefully my slides are back up now, but what I just shared with you all was the result of our proof of concept that we ran from August through September. We had a number of entities that participated in the proof of concept. So from the manufacturing community, we had Genentech, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer. From the distributor standpoint, we had AmerisourceBergen and McKesson. And then from the dispensers, we had CVS, Walgreens, and then also Sam's Health Mart Pharmacy, which is an independent pharmacy located in Missouri. And then we've also had discussions with our member boards of pharmacy. Obviously, California, we're presenting to you all today. But the key thing that we tried to do as we went forward with the POC is to really hear from regulatory and from industry, how would this need to function in order for this to be a solution that you would want to participate in? Because we're trying to, we're trying to make this, voluntary, we also need to have some incentives there. And so our thought process is that if we're able to create that consolidated place for trading partner and regulator communication, but then also have a standard format for what the requests from regulators would look like and how those responses would come back, we do think that there's value in being able to have that sort of consolidation and that sort of platform that could help facilitate that communication. And so from NABP's perspective, our viewpoint is that the more trading partners that actually participate in this electronic and interoperable system, the safer the supply chain is going to be. So from, with the conversations we've had through the pilot and through the POC, we also believe that the small dispenser community, there are a number of challenges that the small dispenser community has just with pharmacy practice broadly. But when you think about additional requirements, the question is, how can we remove some of those barriers to participation so that those small dispensers are able to respond to regulator requests and make sure that we're getting suspect product out of the supply chain. But similarly, how could we help facilitate when a small dispenser actually has to request transaction information from their trading partners? So that's why NABP and what we've explored with our executive committee is to actually build and fund what we've shown for you here today at no cost. And what we want to be able to do is make it so that, to be able to claim, create, or maintain a trading partner directory profile, that registration process, there would be no cost for that. To be able to achieve that check status, to have your license verified and to be able to surface that sort of green check mark to show that you meet what is required under the DSCSA to be an authorized trading partner. In addition, responding to regulator trace and verification requests for not only for the boards, but also for all trading partners to be able to help facilitate that communication and get suspect or illegitimate products out of the supply chain. We believe that's an important public health and safety mission and consistent with our mission to help support our member boards of pharmacy. And then finally, for those small dispensers that maybe can't afford to buy a solution or subscribe to a solution to help, store their EPCIS information or to actually conduct traces and verifications as they are required to do in certain instances under the law. Let's say those small dispensers decide they're just going to use their wholesaler to store their transaction information. So is there an instance where, we could actually provide that same sort of tracing and communication functionality to help them meet their compliance obligations, and then they could just pull that transaction information down from their wholesaler to be able to help respond, to not only to be able to respond to a regulator request, but then to initiate those requests as well. So finally, our next steps is really just a lot of industry collaboration, working with the solution providers and beginning to sort of understand what those integration points may look like. The solution and how tracing is going to work as we move toward November of 2023, it still may be a very manual system early state. It could be a lot of email or email plus, a specific attachment that has transaction information, or you could use portals like what we showed here today, and then also just integrated API. So again, this is going to be a hybrid in terms of what participation actually looks like, but we need to be prepared to support all of those different types of functions. And then finally, and I think this is key with our objectives here, ensuring that there are equitable, efficient, and scalable pathways for adoption for states and for small dispensers. And I think that's been what's been driving us over the course of the past year plus, and that's what's going to continue to drive us as we move forward. And then my final point, and then I'll pause for questions. Our focus here is on what we can do as an association to support the state regulatory community and our member boards of pharmacy. But really, for us, it is about protecting patients and protecting the supply chain. And so our belief is that the more communication between regulators and trading partners we can facilitate, that's going to get products out of illegitimate suspect products out of the supply chain more rapidly. But moreover, if we can use this infrastructure to help, help the supply chain more broadly meet its compliance obligations, in particular for those small dispensers, we think that's an opportunity that we need to explore as well. Because, again, increasing the more entities that participate in this electronic and interoperable system of systems, that's going to lead to a safer supply chain and ultimately will lead to safer outcomes for patients. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And, again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I'm judging by the fact that no one's chimed in that you guys can all hear me okay now. So with all that said, I'll pause and we'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Josh. Members, do you have any questions for Josh? I have a couple questions, Josh. Could you just remind us what was the timing requirements for each?
Sure. That's right. So the law, when responding to a state regulator request for transaction information, if it's a suspect or illegitimate product, manufacturers and wholesale distributors have 24 hours to respond to that regulator request. Pharmacies have been given 48 hours to respond to the request. And because of that timing, if you think about, the use case today, a Board of Pharmacy inspector could just walk into the pharmacy and request the transaction history and they're done. But because that sunsets, you have to go to each trading partner in order to gather that transaction information. So that's why our thought process initially is that by starting at the point of manufacturer and the dispenser, if those are, if the dispenser is known, that's a faster way to sort of cut out some of that timing. So hopefully by, being able to have a network or a system in place like this, it would be able to help facilitate more rapid responses and more efficient handling.
Thank you. And if you could just emphasize, I know you did go over a few things, but just if you could just focus on what pharmacies should be ready for November 23, just kind of summarize that one more time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a pharmacy perspective, there are several baseline compliance obligations. Some that are in place today, and some that will go into effect for the electronic and interoperable system. And so I'll focus on sort of post November 2023. But what we're looking at in terms of those baseline requirements is that, a pharmacy, if they identify a suspect or illegitimate product, there are, they need to have policies and procedures in place that detail how they need to, what steps they take. So, they quarantine the product, contact their trading partners to request information, contact the manufacturer. Those are all things that should really even be in place today. But when it comes to the electronic and interoperable system, one of the keys is that dispensers have a responsibility to sort of receive and store that transaction information in a secure, electronic, and interoperable manner. And so, many dispensers may use a solution provider to help meet that particular part of the obligation, but many smaller dispensers may actually just rely on their wholesaler to store their transaction information for them, which is permissible under the law. So the issue being that if you have multiple wholesalers, you may have multiple points to where you may have to store information and go back and retrieve it. Now, the one thing that a wholesaler can't do for a dispenser, however, is, they can't quarantine product. They can't conduct an investigation into that suspect or illegitimate product, and they can't perform product verifications or product tracing. And so that's where, if they are relying on their wholesaler to store their transaction information, they will also need a mechanism to be able to help, to be able to respond to a regulator request, for example. So if that regulator makes a request and they're using their wholesaler to store their information, the thought process is that what I just showed through the demo would be a way for them to actually meet their obligations to respond to a regulator trace request. So by having the trading partner directory in place and then these communication tools layered on top of that, that should put hopefully the dispensers that may not be able to use the solution provider to use those tools to meet their compliance obligations. The final thing that I would note is that NABP has worked with, and I'm going to leave some of these organizations out by accident. We've worked with American Pharmacists Association, ASHP, NCPA, I think NASPA, as well as the Partnership for the Prescription Drug Security Alliance, the Partnership for DSGSA Governance, and the Healthcare Distribution Alliance to form an educational webpage that dispensers can go to kind of find some good resources for what they need to do. And so that webpage is dsgsa.pharmacy. Again, that's dsgsa.pharmacy. And I'll be happy to send that along to staff to share with the board or post in minutes or whatever is helpful. But that really is one of the biggest challenges is technology aside, just what are the baseline obligations that dispensers have both today and then moving ahead. And so I think hopefully what we've talked about here today can at least help with help that smaller dispenser community with some of those compliance obligations.
Thank you, Josh. And I saw Renee, your hand was raised. Just want to make sure you have any questions.
Actually, my question was similar to basically what you asked about what's, for a pharmacy, what was it there to do? And then I just did have a question. So with this system, this tracing system, is that like, I assume there would be some kind of internal reporting, like just a dashboard, if you will, of what's being discovered. So maybe people could learn from this, some of the transactions that happened that were fraudulent.
Sure.
And then the other question is, what does it show? Like we saw an example of, looking at a successful, like we checked it, it checked out good, we're all good. But what if it wasn't all good? Like how how is that notification happen and to who?
Right. So what would happen in this instance is what I showed was absolutely the happy path, and that's easiest for demos. So the unhappy path, some examples of that would be if we got information, from the manufacturer that, instead of showing them selling direct to a dispenser, let's say that it said that they were selling to XYZ wholesaler. And then we did the trace request from the dispenser, but let's say that the dispenser said, well, I didn't buy it from XYZ wholesaler, I bought it from a different wholesaler. We can use other initials. And so it's really then sort of recreating to make sure that who the manufacturer sold it to and who the distributor sold it to, that all of that matches up in the end. So what would happen is, because this is supposed to be electronic and interoperable, if there was some ownership change that wasn't represented there, it would show up in the transaction history. So if the dispenser said they bought it from someone who was different than the manufacturer sold it to, and then when you further query, that's when you would see the sort of unhappy path, so to speak. So again, it's recreating that transaction history to be able to show, that something was missing. Are the slides still displaying on the screen? So let me see if I can advance. I don't know if I have control to advance these or not. Because what I would pull up, so this is a perfect example, right? Like this is this is an example where there's clearly a transaction missing from the Gilead case. So you have that, you know, the pedigree that, you know, that SafeChain provided to its pharmacy. So this is the transaction history that the wholesaler sent to the pharmacy. And you can see that there's something missing here. So this whole transaction didn't exist. So as we're going back and recreating that transaction history, it would show a hole in the system or a transaction that one trading partner said happened that the other trading partner can't also validate on their side.
And that's evidenced by the missing date? Is that what
that would be evidenced by the missing data. So again, because each trading partner has to respond with their transaction information, the thought process is that you shouldn't be able to forge that transaction information since everything has to be passed electronically and interoperably. So the change of ownership would be missing from that record, or it wouldn't, or you would have different transactions that wouldn't match up in that instance.
And then my other question would be, so it sounds like that the conversation sounds like it's always initiated by a state inspector who suspects something. So what if it's a pharmacy? They have a product, right. They think all the pathway was correct in purchasing, but it doesn't look right. What would be that step?
Right, and so the escalation could be, they could conduct what's known as a product verification. So that's essentially, again, scanning a product, and then that asks the question of the manufacturer, did you actually affix these product identifiers to this product? And that's a yes or no response that the manufacturer would provide back. And so then the next step could potentially be to actually conduct a trace as a pharmacy. So to go back and go back to the wholesaler that you bought the product from and understand where they bought the product from. But ultimately, if it's something that the pharmacist feels is unfit for distribution, that product should be quarantined and investigated. That's the obligation under the law. And so if something, if it looks miscolored or something's wrong with the external packaging or things like that, like that's an automatic pause. And then following procedures to make sure that you're following up with following up with the manufacturer, filing, making sure that you file a 3911 as appropriate. But I think that first call would be, getting that product out of distribution and then using the tools available to be able to conduct that investigation. And that's what we view these tracing and verification tools as being able to be used by the pharmacy community when they don't have a solution provider that can do that for them.
I see. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh. Any other member questions? Don't see anyone raising the hand. So as a public agency, Josh, the board provides opportunities for public comment at each agenda item. So we'll now be accepting public comments on the agenda item. Public comment is not a question and answer time, but you are welcome to respond to any comments if you would like, but you're not required to do so. Members, if you would like to Josh to respond to any of the public comment, just request such a response as well. Moderator, please open the line for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. This is the moderator. It looks like we have a request from individual logged in as Stephen Gray. And Stephen, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 10-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I look forward, Josh, to many more as this evolves. First comment I want to make is about the security. It's really important, and I think NABP has always had excellent coverage of that importance to have security But what some of the board members, especially maybe the public members, may not realize, is that if the security is not trusted by the trading partners, it will have serious effects, and some of those effects you may not realize. So for an example, I think, Josh, that you basically said that things can only be traced by the serial number on the package, and you can't go in and trace by just NDC number and find out, who the manufacturer sold it all to and all of that. That's very important to protect those trading partner relationships because they are confidential and proprietary. And if that's not trusted, those partnerships, those contracts between manufacturers and purchasers will suddenly disappear, and the result will be a substantial increase in the cost of medications for some patients out there. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that you didn't mention was this is for NABP, which of course serves boards of pharmacy, but is your system or something similar going to be able to for other boards? And what is the plan for, physicians who buy, clinics who aren't licensed by the Board of Pharmacy that buy, other entities? What is the traceability of that going to be? Thank you very much.
Yep. So I'm happy to respond if appropriate. So on the first question of security, absolutely. That was something that we explored a lot, both in the pilot, but then also as we've moved ahead with the proof of concept, is having a real understanding of, what we need to do, what we need to have in place to protect the confidential and proprietary information of that transaction information. And so I think that's where we're spending a lot of time understanding what the needs from trading partners are to make sure that we can effectively, securely, and safely facilitate that sharing of information, through the network. And then now that I'm completely blanking on the second question. Oh, the second question was on folks who are outside of the Board of Pharmacy. So the short answer is yes. So you have obviously the Board of Pharmacy, members, their compliance officers, but there are also regulatory bodies that regulate wholesalers and 3PLs that are outside of NABP. And so our intention would be to provide this type of platform for them to be able to use as well from a regulatory perspective. And then when you look ahead to the others that are defined as dispensers, to the extent that those entities need tools to help meet their compliance obligations, I think we would view them similarly as a small dispenser and needing to be able to provide those types of tools for them, so that way they're able to respond to requests, but then also initiate them when necessary. Because I think another point that I failed to mention, I believe it was with Ms. Barker's question, is FDA has also said that products shouldn't move unless that transaction information is received. So being able to store and receive that transaction information is going to be really critical. And so that's why these tools, to be able to handle those exceptions and sort of conduct those investigations rapidly, we hope that'll also help keep commerce moving along, if you will.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for responding, and thank you for the presentation. Really, really appreciate it. I hope we'll probably hear from you a little more often as it gets closer to the deadline of November 2023, which will come by faster than we think.
Yeah, yes, it will. Again, thank you for the opportunity to come represent NABP and talk about what we're working on. Always appreciate that. And again, sorry for the technical difficulties earlier, but thank you for the good guidance to help get that fixed quickly. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to the next agenda item 14, presentation on report of fee audit report prepared by Dan. Is it Eads or Eds? Sorry, Dan, please correct me. Capital Accounting Partners, LLC. Members, I would now like to welcome Dan from Capital Accounting Partners to provide a presentation on the fee audit report prepared. Mr. Eads, I appreciate your work to conduct a fee audit and coming today to provide a presentation on your findings.
Well,
Board.
thank you. Thank you very much. I'm assuming you all can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity of being with you this morning. Let me just quickly point out one thing that I think is really critical maybe for you all. I've done probably 12 or 13 of these fee audits for various boards and bureaus within the Department of Consumer Affairs. And they are data rich, shall we say. I'm looking for a lot of data, and just kudos to Anne and her really outstanding team. Much of the data I look for takes 2 or 3 and 4 weeks to gather. Her team provided everything I needed typically within a day or two. So just kudos to them. I can't thank them enough for their support and participation and really active engagement in this project. There's 3 parts to this presentation this morning. They're pretty straightforward. First, I'll be reviewing the scope and methodology. Second, the key findings, and thirdly, the recommendations. And if any, just logistics, if anybody does have a question, I do not mind being interrupted. Although if you raise your hand, I won't be able to see you. So someone else will need to be monitoring that. But if anybody does have a question, I do not mind being interrupted, but I will have a place at the end specifically for questions. Project scope. It's pretty straightforward. Calculate the full cost of processing licenses for actually both individual and institutional licensees. Determine an equitable method of allocating non-fee expenses such as investigations, enforcement, and other functions that may apply. And then developing long-term fee projections for up to 10 years so that the board can establish its caps. Next slide, please. Thank you. Basic assumptions critical to this analysis. There's really 2. One is that current budget expenditures will be fully spent. In reality, budget expenditures seldom are fully spent, but in doing this analysis, we have to make certain assumptions, and this is one, and that is that all expenditures will be fully spent. The other assumption is that the results are a snapshot in time. They may vary depending upon when a fee schedule is adopted. They may vary depending upon when people get hired. Length of time between someone leaving the organization and then replacing that person. But so we're just really looking at a snapshot in time as opposed to going back 3 or 5 years and developing long-term projections based on historical averages. So we're really just looking at really what are the costs and expenditures and what should the fee levels be as of the moment. Next slide, please. There's really 4 phases to these projects. And in many ways, these phases do overlap. The first phase, obviously, is to collect the data. And there's 4 primary types of data that we're looking for. One is time estimate data, and that data simply means if staff is processing any given application, how much time does it take to process? We actually break those processes down into bite-sized pieces, so we know what goes on in, for example, in terms of reviewing an initial application for licensee, looking into the details of those licensees, what happens when a licensee may trigger an investigation. So we're breaking all of that time data down into bite-sized pieces of the activities and the processes to actually process each individual application. We're looking at budget data, revenue data, and activity data, which is essentially the number of times any given fee or applicant is processed on an annual basis. And that actually is a very important number because it helps me identify and project out revenue, helps me within our own internal quality assurance standards. So all of that data is very critical. And like I say, kudos to Ann. I really cannot express my appreciation to them enough for how quickly they responded to my data request. Allocate support costs. This is actually a major function of what we do in these projects. Much of the cost in the individual fees really has nothing to do with processing the individual license. It has to do with how do we allocate investigation costs and enforcement costs. And I'll get into more on that in just a minute. And then thirdly, set cost recovery targets and policies. In many of these, I get intimately involved with this phase. Other times, not so much. Most of the time, I'm just recommending that fee levels be set based on values, based on established policies, and then establish the full cost for recovery. And there's really a couple of parts to this. One is that you are under no obligation to actually set a fee at the cost that we calculated. The actual fee that you charge can be lower, can be higher. But I have given Ann and her staff the ability to go into the spreadsheet model that I created and actually reconfigure the actual prices that will be charged, but still so that you could establish full cost recovery. And finally, obviously, to be able to set your fees going out as far as 10 years, so you know what your, or at least you know on a projected basis, what your revenues will be. You can compare those with projected expenses. And so you could also set the caps, which Ann can tell you more about, but that's simply the ability for the board to adjust its fees in a more expeditious manner than having to go to the state legislature. Key findings, next slide, please. And once you go on to the next one. So in doing these presentations, almost invariably, somebody is going to say, well, how do you know that your data is accurate? How do you know that your inputs are accurate? How do you calculate the quality of your output? And there's really three quality checks that we use. Two of them are right here. The first one you'll see is total resources available. So the big bold there, 33 million. $190,000 of resources that are available. You might call that your budget expenditures. In the model that I create, I have to account for $33,190,000. If you go down about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see a 0.02 in parentheses. That means that out of $33 million, I'm off by 2 cents. And so if you'll forgive me for that, when in my worldview, that's like throwing a dart at the moon and hitting it. So I'm happy with that. Second one is total hours available. Now we've got 230,000 hours available. Those are productive hours, not necessarily total employee hours. But in the model that I create, again, I need to account for 230,000 hours to make sure that I'm fully accounting for all of the resources coming into the model, so that you can actually then be assured that when you set your fee levels, you can actually fully recover your actual and total cost. There's a third indicator that I use of quality input and quality output, and that's really staff observations. So this is a highly iterative process. We went through at a minimum 3 different reviews. The staff who actually do the work, they reviewed the results, and Lori and her management team reviewed the results, and then Ann and her senior leadership team reviewed the results. Each layer of review typically triggers additional review considerations, adjustments to time, different looks at how to allocate the enforcement and investigation costs. And when everybody says, okay, we understand this, we understand how you got to the numbers that you did, we agree with the inputs, then my job is finished. Next slide, please. So key net revenues. So you'll see the two bars on the left, the blue bars on the left. The far bar on the left indicates the full cost of $33 million. The second bar to the right shows $31 million. That would be the projection of revenue at current fees, which is a difference of $1.6 million, which is the little red bar going on to the right. And $1.6 million in, let's say, call it a deficit, is probably manageable. I would leave the how manageable that is up to Ann and her team. I'm guessing longer, midterm, like in the next maybe 6 to 12 months, that's going to be harder and harder to manage. Not sure what the state is doing with regard to increases in salaries, but all of my municipal clients right now are going through mid-year budget corrections, having to significantly increase salaries. That's both as a way of keeping people, and then they're finding they have to significantly up their offers when they are replacing and hiring new people coming into their organizations. Now, one of the big findings in this particular project is the far red bar, which is total projected deficit. I'm going to get back to this in a minute, but I will mention this right now. One of the important considerations in this particular project is rebuilding reserves. The state requires the board to have 12 months of operating expenses as a reserve fund. And right now there's the reserve fund is right at 4 months. So a big part of the cost recovery fees, or the fee level, setting fees for cost recovery, has to rebuild those reserves, and I will get back to that in just a moment. Next slide, please. So invariably, in doing one of these presentations for the boards of bureau and/or bureaus of the DCA as well, someone asks, well, why are costs so high, and what are the major components of cost? And I typically will calculate the total cost of enforcement, and this includes enforcement and investigations and anything that looks like enforcement or investigation. And in this particular board, we found that almost 71% of total cost is involved with some kind of enforcement or investigation activity. This is not at all unusual. I think in doing 12 or 13 of these, I think the lowest level of enforcement activity I found was 35 or 40% of total cost, and the highest was upwards, I think it was in excess of 75% of total cost. So as many of you, I'm sure you're aware, maybe others not so much, enforcement investigations is a significant component of total cost, which must be recovered through the fees so that the board can maintain its regulatory functions. Next slide, please, and I will show you an example of how enforcement costs will impact. This is a specific fee, and you can see there the direct cost of that fee, and this would be like the actual time to process that. The fee is $11.44. You throw on there some additional overhead costs, travel time, administration, and there's another $18, $19. But the real cost, the major impact of cost, and is in all of the various enforcement and investigation activities. So you end up with a total cost for the fee of $346, which I think will illustrate really the impact of enforcement activities on fee levels. So next slide, please. Let me get back to the state requirement that 12 months of operating expenses be held in reserve. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a significant component of why fee levels need to be going up. Next slide, please. You can see here at the end of fiscal 2022-23, the projected fund balance is going to be 4.1 months, which is obviously 8 months short of the state mandate. And as expenses continue to go up, with if nothing changes, as expenses go up, so must this reserve fund balance. So as you get out to all the way out to fiscal 27, 28, if nothing changes, there will be a deficit of 2.5 months left in the reserve, which means the board will not be able to function. Next slide, please. So recommendations and next steps, and these are pretty standard for us. From my experience and observation, there's really nothing new or unique about these. One, obviously, is to set fees to recover the full cost plus an amount which we actually calculated to be a little over $5 million annually to rebuild those reserves. Obviously, you can't rebuild your reserve and your fund balances overnight. So in our methodology, we assume rebuilding those over a 5-year period of time. Second recommendation: raise the statutory cap to cover a regular fee increase for at least 5 years. Our recommendations is that 10 years is better. Third, establish pricing guidelines. As I mentioned earlier, the board is under no legal obligation to charge the actual cost. It can charge, the actual price could be more or could be less than what we calculated in terms of cost. But I do recommend that guidelines be established based on some core values for the board. And then the fourth recommendation is pretty standard: conduct a fee audit fee assessment every 3 to 5 years. We find that within 3 to 5 years, the regulatory environment has changed. The state has provided new regulatory obligations, typically without funding. And so there's just enough going on within the regulatory environment, within the state mandates, that these fee audits should be updated every 3 to 5 years. That's pretty quick. Let me just quickly go to any questions or comments that you all might have, and I'm happy to address those now.
Thank you, Dan. Members, please, if you have any questions, raise your hand or just speak up. Trevor, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that great presentation. I had a question because the segment of the expenses in there that's covered by the fees that are paid was the probation observation. And I'm a newer member, so I apologize if this has been covered before. But aren't typically the cost of probation covered by those who are on probation themselves and not necessarily through the fees?
I could give you my perspective on that, but Anne might have maybe a more complete perspective.
Sorry, slow on that unmute. So there are some direct probation monitoring costs, but those don't include the full cost of things. So it might include like the hour of inspector time to do the inspection, but it doesn't include the full probation monitoring activities, nor does it include some of those other distributed costs that Dan was kind of talking about that are also allocated across. So it's a small percentage is captured through that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, also great question. And let me maybe just add on to Anne's comment and respond to a question that typically comes up. And that is, what do we do with fines and the various revenues that do come in that reflect some kind of a fine activity? And simply stated, I ignore that. The board has precious little control over its fine revenue. It may fine an applicant for some egregious activity. $10,000, there's absolutely no guarantee that that money is actually going to be seen. A judge can often lower that, eliminate it, do whatever they want to with it. So that revenue, which is actually a very, very small part of the total revenue for those kinds of fines and reimbursement activities, I typically just ignore.
Thank you for the question, Trevor. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So, sorry, is it Eads or
It's Ed's.
Eds?
Actually, it's Ed's unless you're the other side of my family, then it's Eads. So take your pick.
Okay, Mr. Eds. So as a public agency, the board provides opportunity for public comment on each agenda item. So we'll now be accepting public comment on the agenda item. Public comment is not question and answer, but you're welcome to respond to any comments, but you're not required to do so. Members, if you'd like Mr. Eds to respond to any public comments, you can request such a response. And moderator, we're ready.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access those features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Mr. Eds. Thank you for the presentation, members. As a reminder, we will be discussing recommendations on possible changes to the board's fee schedule later today in a little bit as part of the organizational development committee. I don't know if you're available, Mr. Eds, but if you could be there for that portion, just in case we have questions, might also be really good. But if you're not, no worries as well. So,
I'm an email or phone call away, so feel free.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. We're moving on to next agenda item 15, but we're going to take a break about 15 minutes. So we'll come back at 10:35. 10:35. We'll see you back 10:35. All right, we'll get started on the next agenda item 15, Standard of Care Ad Hoc Committee Report. Members, on behalf of the committee, I'm happy to provide an update. I would like to thank my fellow committee members, Maria Serpa, Renee Barker, Indira Cameron Banks, Jessica Crawley, and Nicole Thibault. We had a great discussion yesterday with significant stakeholder engagement. The first part of the committee report is discussion and consideration of results of pharmacist survey related to current practice and possible movement to standard of care enforcement model. To facilitate engagement by licensees not available to participate in public meetings, the committee previously developed a survey as a means to solicit feedback for the committee's consideration. The survey was available from September 12th through October 3rd, and the board received 1,788 responses. During our meeting yesterday, we received a brief presentation on the survey results from Anne. A copy of the presentation slides is included in the meeting materials. The results of the survey helped in part to evaluate the policy questions discussed under the next agenda item. Members, do you have any questions or comments on the information? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Moderator, please open the line for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, next item is discussion and consideration of policy questions related to standard of care enforcement model in the practice of pharmacy. Members, as I did yesterday, I would like to remind everyone present of the language provided in Business and Professions Code section 4301.3, which states on or before July 1st of 2023, the board shall convene a work group of interested stakeholders to discuss whether moving to a standard of care enforcement model would be feasible and appropriate for the regulation of pharmacy, and make recommendation to the legislature about the outcome of these discussions through a report submitted pursuant to section 1997-95 of the Government Code. Thank you for patience while I read that section of the law. So just a reminder why we convened this committee and why we are discussing the standard of care. So as I indicated yesterday, it is important for members to remember what the legislature is asking of the board is to moving to a standard of care enforcement model is both feasible and appropriate for pharmacy law. The board already uses a standard of care enforcement model, however, and I think consistent with a legislative mandate to see if there are opportunities to more robustly use such a model in enforcement. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the meeting materials where two examples of how the standard of care enforcement model is currently applied in investigations in enforcement. During the meeting yesterday, we discussed a number of policy questions which are detailed in the chair report. I'm not going to review each question here, but wanted to share where there appears to be consensus among committee members and stakeholders. There appears to be consensus that the board's current enforcement model, which is a hybrid model, is appropriate for facilities licensed by the board. As part of our discussion, we noted that unlike pharmacists, facilities do not have extensive education and experience, nor do they exercise professional judgment. There appears to also be a consensus that the board's current enforcement model is appropriate in the regulation of non-pharmacist licensed personnel, such as pharmacy technicians, designated representatives, and interns. Members noted that there may be an opportunity to expand the scope of practice for pharmacy technicians. However, pharmacy technicians operate under the direct supervision and control of a pharmacist. Further, committee members noted that technicians should not have discretion. The committee then transitioned its discussion to evaluation of the questions related to pharmacists and PICs. As part of our comments, it was noted that the board may need to draw a distinction between a pharmacist and a PIC, noting that a PIC is responsible for compliance with the law. Members also noted the different types of practice settings and functions that a pharmacist may perform and the need to perform clinical judgments. There appear to be some consensus that there is opportunity to use a more robust standard of care enforcement model for pharmacists. Public comment also appeared to agree there is opportunity for more robust use of a standard of care enforcement model for pharmacists. One large challenge identified during our discussion is how a PIC can be autonomous and control the operations of a pharmacy when appropriate, when corporate practices exist that undermine PIC's autonomy and authority. Following discussion and questions related to the use of the standard of care enforcement model, the committee transitioned to a larger question regarding opportunities to expand the scope of practice for pharmacists. There was again consensus that opportunities do exist and noted there are many opportunities for regulations to be less restrictive. Members also noted some challenges with such a transition, including if pharmacists would be empowered to provide clinical services autonomously. Members indicated the need for some consistency and to ensure pharmacists are appropriately educated and training to provide the service. Members also considered if the current CE requirements related to specific authorities would still be necessary. Public comment also appeared to be in support, with some commenters noting the number of specialties available for pharmacists. Comments indicated that a standard of care enables pharmacists to exercise professional judgment. Members concluded also that changes to regulation should not be limited to specific practice settings. The committee also appeared to reach consensus that a transition to standard of care could result in expanded access to care and improved patient outcomes. Members noted that some conditions may be necessary and cautioned that as the board moves forward, it is necessary to make sure that the unintended consequences is not a lowering of the standard of care. Public comment agreed with members. Members also considered if minimum requirements on training or education is necessary or requirements to ensure baseline competencies are met. Members noted some challenges. Some members noted the need for some minimum training, while other members cautioned about being too specific. The committee will resume its discussion at its next meeting, which we will publish the date by the end of this week, hopefully probably sometime in November, and hopes to have a draft report in time for February meeting. Sorry for the long summary, and I know Ann and I, we tried to do our best to summarize it as much as we could, but it really does not capture everything that went in during the meeting. And I would highly recommend to all members, as this, I think, report is a very important part of what we are doing. I do highly recommend you watch that meeting, which should be on DCA YouTube webcast moment in very near future. So if you could also review that meeting and actually listen to the conversation, it is very been a great discussion and robust discussion. So I highly encourage members to watch that meeting. With that, any other member comments? Please add on. Feel free to jump in. Unfortunately, Nicole is not here, but I think I have all other members present today that was there. So. Okay, no other questions or comments? With that, I will open for public comment.
I apologize for speaking on mute. This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and I apologize. We do have one request for public comment. Individual logged in as Keith Yoshizuka. And Keith, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 10-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Keith Yoshizuka, California Society of Health System Pharmacists. I believe the report will indicate, but I think it's important that we examine the possible migration to a standard of practice model. And case in point, to avoid delays that we saw during the pandemic. It took a while, and to Governor Newsom's credit, he apologized, saying that he should have acted sooner in granting pharmacists authority to test and eventually to give the immunizations under the standard of practice. This delay would have been avoided, and we could have addressed some of the issues that were seen during the pandemic much earlier. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you for the comments. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 16, licensing committee report. Also pleased to provide a report on the actions of the licensing committee. Thank you to my fellow committee members, Chick Patel, Indira Cameron Banks, Jessica Crawley, and Jason Wise. Starting with the discussion and consideration of current statutory proposal to expand current pharmacy technician authorized duties, current pharmacist to pharmacy technician ratio, and possible changes. As included in the meeting materials, the board has dedicated significant time to assessing the role of pharmacy technicians. The committee's meeting last week was the first time the board considered a draft statutory proposal. This proposal was drafted after considerable opportunities for participation and discussion by both members and stakeholders. As I did last week, I want to publicly acknowledge and thank everyone, members and stakeholders, for your robust engagement. I recognize that sometimes policy changes do not move as quickly as some would like. The deliberative and thoughtful process used in the board's efforts is necessary to ensure actions taken by the board and consistent with the board's consumer protection mandate. History of the various action taken are detailed in the meeting materials, so I will not review it, but note that following consideration of information received and in response to various policy questions, the committee identified areas of consensus which was used as a framework for the statutory proposal. Attachment 1 includes a copy of the statutory proposal reviewed and approved by members during our meeting last week. The proposal serves as a complement to activities underway in other committees, including the Medication Error Reduction and Workforce Committee. The committee's recommendation is included in the meeting materials and displayed on the meeting slide, albeit very little, so you probably can't read it, but it's on the committee report. With the recommendation serving as the motion, the committee recommendation serving as the motion, I would like to ask if members have any questions or comments on the language, which I'm sure we will have some comments on this. Or maybe not. Okay, no member comment. So we're gonna go to public comment.
Oh, I apologize. It looks like board member Jaw has his hand raised.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, KK.
Hey, sorry. So just a quick question. When we are talking about additional duties to technician to be performed, there is somewhere in the language, and I don't have it in front of me right now, that pharmacist in charge has to determine the competency of the technician in doing such duties. Are we going to have any standardization of training discussion for that matter? That if we are saying competent, then what defines the competency? Are we going to provide any guidance, or how are we going to manage that?
I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I'm going to defer that to Ann. I'm sorry, Ann. I'm going to put you on spot because, yeah, you probably can explain it a little bit more better.
Yeah, so I think probably in a few ways. So I think that the board could provide guidance. I think some of it is really, what does the PIC deem as appropriate? We did put down some minimum training requirements. So you'll notice that certification is required for individuals that are going to be performing these advanced duties, as well as the immunization training requirements. So those are both in there. But with respect to the PIC specifically, it's just making sure that the technician, that the PIC at minimum has determined that they're competent, so that when pharmacists are working with the technicians, they have that confirmation that individual is appropriate to be performing specimen collection or whatever the case may be.
And I assume same thing applies to the testing as well when technician is performing or will be performing? That PIC will determine the competency of the tech?
Yeah, so for any of the duties that are detailed out in G, so that includes the vaccines, the epinephrine, the specimen collection, receiving those verbal prescriptions and transfers, those would all require the PIC to confirm competency.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, KK. Okay, I don't see anyone else, so I'm gonna go to public comment. We'll probably have some public comment on this, I would imagine, so we're gonna see.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. And it does look like we have a request for comment from Lindsay Gullahorn. Lindsay, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 10-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
You. Good morning. This is Lindsay Gullahorn with the California Retailers Association and National Association of Chain Drug Stores. We want to thank the licensing committee and board staff for their work on drafting this proposal. We're very supportive of the expansion of pharmacy technician duties. A couple of things I wanted to comment on. First, with respect to Section B of the language related to CLIA-waived testing, it limits what pharmacy technicians can do to just performing specimen collection. Unlike federal law, which allows a lab director, which in this case would be a PIC, to determine who can perform testing. So by only allowing specimen collection, pharmacy technicians won't be able to, for example, insert a specimen into a testing advice. So example, a technician would be able to do a finger prick to obtain a blood drop, but would have to somehow transport the blood drop to the pharmacist for the pharmacist to place it in the CLIA-waived testing device. This will interrupt workflow by requiring pharmacists to pause their duties to do this simple insertion. So we just suggest that the proposal be amended to allow technicians to both collect specimens for CLIA-waived tests and to perform the tests. And of course, pharmacists would still evaluate the results and consult with the patient. And then last and other thing I wanted to raise more broadly with respect to the pharmacist to pharmacy technician ratio. While we are very supportive of expanding the ratio, we think this proposal is restrictive because it limits the types of duties the additional pharmacy technician may perform. So we think it's a step in the right direction, but believe any expansion should be more broad and apply across the board. We think a broad expansion is one of the most significant ways California can improve patient care, consumer safety, and reduce workforce pressure in the pharmacy. So again, thank you for your work on this. Appreciate it.
All right, this is the moderator and next individual who has requested public comment, Keith Yoshizuka. And Keith, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 10-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Keith Yoshizuka, CSHP. I applaud the board and the licensing committee for looking into this area of expanded pharmacy technician duties. In the inpatient venue, we've used technicians extensively. And basically it's largely a model where this might be expanded into the outpatient venue. The technicians have proven invaluable in the efforts to get immunizations done in the community, if not administering, at least assisting to draw up the doses. So I applaud the board and encourage you to follow through on the recommendations. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears that was our last request for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you for the comments. And having received public comment, we're ready for a vote. The motion committee recommendation is to pursue a statutory proposal to amend Business and Professions Code Section 4115 as presented and amended to further refine the language contained in 4115G1. Eileen, just confirming that another motion is not necessary. Just wanted to make sure because
President, this is Eileen Smiley. No other motion is necessary. The committee has its proposal before the board. It doesn't need a second. It just needs a vote.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. We'll take a roll call. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Jig?
Yes.
Thank you, Renee.
Yes.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula.
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes, the motion passes. Next
Sa-
agenda item.
Sung, this is
Oh, sorry,
Ricardo. I was gonna vote yes also.
Oh, sorry, Ricardo. Sorry, Ricardo. Ricardo votes yes. For some reason, okay. All right. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item B, discussion and consideration of possible state protocol consistent with provisions of Business and Professions Code Section 4052.01 as amended in Senate Bill 1259. Members, the board previously considered and established a support position on Senate Bill 1259, which sought to amend Business and Professions Code Section 4052.01 to provide authority for pharmacists to furnish Federal Food and Drug Administration approved opioid antagonists in accordance with standardized procedures or protocols developed under specified conditions. The governor signed the measure, which will become effective on January 1st, 2023. As required in the statute, the board and the Medical Board of California must approve the regulation with consultation with the California Society of Addiction Medicine, the California Pharmacists Association, and other appropriate entities. The statute also specifies areas that must be included in the standardized procedures. During our meeting last week, we discussed some history on the initial legislation and noted changes that have occurred and additional access points for patients to access naloxone hydrochloride, including authority for pharmacies to furnish naloxone hydrochloride to law enforcement agencies and to school districts, county office of education, or charter schools under specified conditions. This expansion has occurred to ensure ready access to this life-saving medication and does not appear to create some of the same requirements as the board's current protocol. The required protocol for pharmacists is included in the California Code of Regulations, Section 1746.3, and establishes the requirements for the standardized procedures established for pharmacists to furnish naloxone hydrochloride pursuant to Section 4052.01. The committee noted in agreement with the implementation detailed in the meeting materials. The committee looks forward to continuing its development of regulation changes to facilitate implementation of the legislation while streamlining the process. Any comments or questions from members? Okay, hearing none, we're gonna go for public comment. I don't think the slide is correct, just so everyone's clear. I think that's, yeah, no, I think, sorry, Sarah, we're still on B, but go for public comment. We have no motion on this one.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. Go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Thank you so much. Next agenda item C is discussion and consideration of proposal to establish requirements for pharmacists in charge. The meeting materials detail out the relevant provisions of pharmacy law, including the definition of a pharmacist in charge as a pharmacist proposed by a pharmacy and approved by the board as supervisor or manager responsible for ensuring the pharmacy's compliance with all state and federal laws and regulations pertaining to the practice of pharmacy. As required by law, every pharmacy must designate a PIC who is responsible for the pharmacy's compliance with state and federal laws. Also related to this issue, the board also designated a precedential decision that confirmed that a pharmacist in charge of a pharmacy could be disciplined for a pharmacy's violation of Section 4081 resulting from a pharmacy technician's theft of controlled substances without the pharmacist having actual knowledge of or authorizing the violations. As you may recall, one of the strategic objectives established in the board's new strategic plan is to determine if the application requirements for PICs are appropriate to ensure sufficient knowledge, skills, and abilities for individuals seeking to serve as a PIC. We have previously discussed that it is not uncommon for investigations to substantiate violations where a pharmacist may be designated as a PIC in name only, or the designated PIC fails to exercise appropriate oversight of the operations. Although the egregiousness of the violations varies, there are many instances where such an individual pharmacist ultimately is disciplined, including losing their pharmacist license through the administrative process. As part of the January 2022 board meeting, the board previously approved a draft attestation
This meeting is being recorded.
on the attestation statement and process, and to include the name of the training program in the regulation text. During the meeting, the committee reviewed the proposed changes to the language, which are included in attachment 2. Members, the committee is offering 2 recommendations related to this item, one specifically related to the regulation language, and a second related to the delayed effective date. With the committee's recommendation related to the regulation, any comments on the regulation text, members? Don't see any hand raised or no one speaking, so we're gonna go for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access those features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, with that, we're ready for vote. Maria, how do you vote? Maria?
Sorry for the delay. Yes.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. Chick?
Yes.
Thank you, Renee.
Yes.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula.
Yes.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes, the motion passes. As indicated in the meeting materials, committee is also recommending a delay in effective date to allow for implementation and compliance. With the committee's recommendation related to the effective date serving as the motion, are there any member comments? Hearing none, public comment, please, Sarah.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you. Ready for vote again? Maria?
Yes.
Thank you, Jake.
Yes.
Thank you, Renee.
Yes.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula.
Yes.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes. The motion passes. Next agenda item D, discussion and consideration of discontinuance of business by a pharmacy and potential changes to pharmacy law to ensure continuity of patient care. As part of our meeting last week, the committee initiated discussion on the board's requirements for discontinuance of business. The board's current DOB, discontinuation of business process, requires notification to the board. As highlighted in the meeting materials, the current provisions in the law do not establish conditions for continuity of patient care, which we determined as a committee to be very problematic and contrary to the board's mandate. The meeting materials include two general areas of complaints received related to this issue, including scenarios where a pharmacy has closed and a patient cannot receive a refill because they are unable to contact the pharmacy to request a prescription transfer, or where a pharmacy has closed and transfer patients' prescription refills to another pharmacy, not of the patient's choosing. During the meeting, members considered a number of policy questions. A summary of member comments and public comment is provided in the meeting materials. Staff will work on development of a proposal for future consideration by the committee. Members, any comments? Seeing none, moderator, please open the line for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Next agenda item, item E, discussion and consideration of legal requirements for non-resident pharmacies, including possible changes to require licensure by the pharmacist in charge. California law requires that any pharmacy located outside the state that provides services into California shall be considered a non-resident pharmacy. Further, the section requires licensure as a non-resident pharmacy. There are no current requirements for pharmacists working in these pharmacies to be licensed in California, even when providing care to California patients. Further, there is no requirement for the PIC of the non-resident pharmacy to be licensed in California. Rather, California law currently establishes a prohibition for a pharmacist to provide services to California patients if the pharmacist's license was revoked in California. The National Association of Boards of Pharmacy establishes model rules for boards to consider as part of its regulation of the practice of pharmacy. Regarding the regulation of non-resident pharmacies, the model rules include a requirement for a pharmacy to be licensed in the state in which it's providing services to patients. Further, as the meeting materials indicated, states have a range of requirements for licensure of staff working out of state but providing care to their residents. The materials also provide a few examples of actions taken against non-resident pharmacies. As the board is considering changes to strengthen the requirements for a pharmacist in charge, it is appropriate to also ensure pharmacists appointed as a PIC in non-resident pharmacy also have a full understanding of the law to ensure that Californians who receive prescription drugs from non-resident pharmacies have protections that are similar to those received by resident pharmacies in California. During the meeting, members reviewed how some other states regulate this area. Members considered if a PIC working in a non-resident pharmacy should be required to be licensed in California. Members generally spoke in support of a requirement for California licensed pharmacies to the PIC of a non-resident pharmacy providing services into California, while noting potential gaps in care is possible. Members noted the need for a transition period of compliance to mitigate potential gaps in care. Public comment suggested that the board should consider a registration requirement similar to the Iowa model versus a licensure requirement. I will be working with staff on developing a potential proposal for consideration at a future meeting. Members, any comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we're gonna go for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access those features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, with that, moving on to next agenda item F, licensing statistics. Members attachment 3 includes licensing data for the first quarter of the fiscal year. During the quarter, the board issued over 3,000 individual licenses and 129 site licenses. The board also issued 91 temporary licenses, 55 of which are for community pharmacies. The board has received over 4,500 applications during this quarter, including 90 applications for community pharmacies, the vast majority of which were for non-chain pharmacies. In addition, the board has received 124 temporary applications during the quarter, including 65 for community pharmacies. Similar to my comments during the meeting last week, I highlight specifically the pharmacy workload, as this is one area where licensing times are outside of the board performance measures, although more updated information indicates there has been improvement since the meeting materials were released. As a committee, we have been monitoring processing times, and I have also been working with Anne on this issue. I would like to acknowledge the hard work our licensing staff perform each day. The workload is extensive for the number of staff vacancies, and recruitment challenges are also contributing factors to these processing times. However, that is just part of the realities of the processing times as well. Staff experience challenges with applicants that provide incomplete or conflicting information during the application process. Full transparency by entities seeking licensure at the time of application will aid staff significantly in reducing processing times. During the meeting, we received public comments from individuals suggesting that the board develop a means to allow for the monitoring of the application process through an online system. Comments also indicated that inquiries submitted via email go unanswered, which leads to frustration, which we're working on to try to address. Members? Okay, we're going to go for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we're ready for the next section, which is Organizational Development Committee Report. I'll now provide an update on several items under the purview of the Organizational Development Committee. You'll note from the meeting materials there is one potential item for action, big one, as actually. Budget update for fiscal year 2022 through 23. The new fiscal year began on July 1st of 2022. The board spending authorization for the new fiscal year is about $31.3 million, which is a 2.5% increase from the prior year. Budget update for fiscal year 21 through 22. Final budget figures for FY 21 through 22 are available and included in the meeting materials. The board received approximately $36 million in revenue and expended about $29.5 million. The board reverted about $1 million back into its fund. Fund condition, a review of the fund condition prepared by the department indicates that at the end of the fiscal year 21 through 22, the board has 4.9 months in reserve, as indicated in the meeting materials under provisions of pharmacy law. The board shall seek to maintain a reserve equal to approximately 1 year's operating expenditures. Further, the fund condition projects a continued depletion of the board's fund. Members, any questions or comments? Moderator, we're ready for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you. Next is board member attendance and mail vote information. Member attendance is summarized in attachment 2, and attachment 3 includes mail vote information. Members, any comments on the information? Okay, Sarah, we're ready for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access those features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Sarah. Next is personnel update. As detailed in the meeting materials, the board has a number of vacancies, including a key leadership position. The vacancy count is higher as the board received new positions on July 1st. It's my understanding several of the inspector and licensing positions have active recruitments underway. I look forward to monitoring the progress of these recruitments, as filling vacancies will help to reduce processing times. Working closely with Anne on recruitment challenges. Members, do you have any comments or questions? Seeing none, we're ready for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, next is big one, discussion and consideration of possible change to Business and Professions Code Section 440 related to fees. Earlier today, we received a presentation of the fee audit conducted by Capital Accounting Partners, LLC, including findings and recommendations. The meeting materials provide some of the largest expenditure increases, including increases in state distributed costs, enforcement-related costs, and personnel costs. I'd like to draw your attention to attachment 4 that includes recommended fees for our consideration today. You will note that the scope of the change in fees varies by license type, with some fees being reduced, others not experiencing a current change in fees, while others are recommended to increase immediately. Also included in the meeting materials are fees assessed by other regulators that also license facilities, including the FDA. You'll note an extremely large disparity between what the board currently assesses as an application fee and renewal fee for an outsourcing facility compared to the fees assessed by the FDA. Comparing the audit findings to this information, the fees assessed by the FDA are more closely aligned with the costs the board incurs for its regulation of such facilities. Members, I would like to open up for discussion. As I would like to note that any change to the board's fee schedule must be done through legislation. If we determine if appropriate to make changes as either recommended in the meeting materials or otherwise, the board will need to sponsor legislation. Members? I have our Vice President Serpa. Go ahead, Maria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I feel like I need to speak on this because it is a very challenging thing for all of us. It's not something that we take lightly or is an easy response, but I think in looking at the current funding levels and the number of months of reserves that we have, we really are forced to reevaluate our fee schedule again. It is not a fun event. It does take a lot of effort. As you said, it is a legislative thing, and it impacts our licensees. I hope that all will look at the different levels of licensure that are being impacted, and we take into consideration the ability of those licensees and the 5-year plan to increase them, as you saw in the report earlier today. So I look forward to the discussion and really understand that this really does hit some areas more acutely than others. I am looking forward to everyone's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Trevor?
Yeah, looking after the presentation and looking at the increase in the various, pretty much, well, all of these make sense to me and seems like a logical, straightforward reassessment in order to make sure that we're able to remain successful. And so I fully intend to support this. My question is more about timeline, given the nature of the deficit as it relates to our reserve funds. Do we have a timeline on or a deadline for when we really need to get this passed by the legislature in order to remain solvent and functioning? Is there a level of urgency that we need to communicate to the legislature that this has to happen within the first year of session, within the first half of the first year of session? How are we communicating that urgency and the need for this change to the legislature?
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you for the comment. I can speak very generally from my understanding is ideally it would be, we would have the opportunity to try to solicit legislation starting for the next year. And so that hopefully it will be effective the year after. That would be the ideal timeline. Anne, please add any additional thoughts.
Yeah, so typically, if we're going to do a fee increase, we're going to need some time to implement as well. So I would envision that if we are successful next year, that fees will not take effect January of 2024, but most likely July of 2024. And that allows time for system changes and everything else, education to happen. Our fund condition indicates that we could potentially squeak by with one more, but based on the fund condition and the projections, I think that that's less ideal. We have not engaged with the legislature at this moment because we're at the staff level kind of waiting for the policy direction from the board, and then afterwards we'll start working towards that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your work on this. Like I said, in my view, all of these adjustments were done very thoughtfully and thoroughly. So I think this all makes complete sense, and we'll look forward to voting for it.
Thank you, Trevor. Jesse?
Hi, thank you. So I just wanted to note a couple of the big changes here that I'm seeing. The 10th pharmacy application, that is just for pharmacy and not for pharmacist, correct? Because that's a pretty substantial jump. I do see the note there about some applicants abusing the 10th process, but I just want clarification on that, I guess.
That's
yes,
correct.
That's for facility license.
Okay. So that's a facility. Okay, that makes sense. I do appreciate that they're considering a decrease in the pharmacy technician application, given that we have such a technician shortage. Hopefully this will encourage more people to apply to become technicians, and the same thing with interns. I will note a pharmacist renewal, if it ends up on the higher end, is pretty significant. And if I'm not mistaken, we'll have almost doubled the renewal fee in about like a 5-year period or so, if I remember correctly, from just renewing my own license. I do want to just point out that pharmacists, especially those graduating more recently, are getting paid significantly less than what we were before. So I just hope that's not a barrier, but I do also understand the financial need of the board, and I'm hoping that we can have some discussion and maybe we get some feedback from other pharmacists as well.
And would probably a good idea for you to explain a little bit of the historically what has happened about the legislative changes and then the regulatory changes that follows on these areas.
So I'm not quite sure I can totally do all of that. Let me just explain a little bit about how the recommendations kind of landed, and then we can talk through maybe some of the historical changes. The last time that the board did statutory change a number of years ago, and I apologize that I don't have that date in front of me, it adjusted its fee schedule, and at that time, some fees went down, others stayed the same. What we see from last time, as well as what we have here, is that the current statutory maximums for many of these fees will become the new statutory minimum. So it's not going to result in a fee increase initially. If there's, significant changes in our expenditures or those kinds of things similar to the audit recommendation, we are building in the recommendation from Mr. Eds was 5 or 10 years. I will tell you that we went with the 10-year model, so that's something that we could talk about if you prefer to not do that. I believe that the fees, I have in my mind like 2016, but I'll need just a minute to pull that up.
Thank you. And then I guess the other one that stood out to me was the transfer of intern hours. I know there's a note there that says many states don't require the intern hours. I guess I would be interested to see what, if that's the case, I guess what the justification is for such a substantial increase there too. I just, there's so much cost to becoming licensed and transitioning from intern to pharmacist. So I just want to make sure that licensees and interns can actually pay for the application process.
Yeah, so the transfer of intern fees, or the transfer of intern licenses specifically, I believe that we're going with, the recommendation is to go with the cost to actually deliver the service. It is a little bit labor intensive depending on the various state requirements. So that's part of the reason that it is where it is set, but with, many states have similar requirements to California, where graduation from the School of Pharmacy, we also accept as confirmation of the completion of the intern hours. So we do not receive a significant number of them. Those that we do receive, though, can be pretty labor intensive.
Great, thank you.
Any other member comments? Okay, we are going to go for public comment.
Sorry, President.
Oh,
This-
sorry. Go ahead, Jay. Go ahead, Jay. Yeah. Oh, and then yeah.
Sorry, I was looking at the recommendations and, I see some significant recommendation to increase non-resident pharmacy app and all. I just had one comment to make about pharmacy technician renewal, that if that could be kept as is, and maybe the deficit from, leaving it as is could be added on to any other institutional licenses, renewal for, clinics, pharmacies, etc., could be passed on to that. As Jesse had mentioned, there is really a shortage of technicians. We definitely need to be considerate about keeping it to the level where they can easily get licensed, and cost is not the barrier. Thanks.
Thank you for the comments. Okay, KK.
Hey, good morning. So similar to the comments made by Jig and Jesse, that definitely not to increase the technician price tag. I would also like to add pharmacist as well. If we can increase the institutional fees and not the individual fees, there may be a little bit better for the individual. As Jessica said, that the new pharmacists have significant cost barrier, as well as not a as high paying as it was at the entry level as it used to be. Thanks.
Thank you, KK. So with those comments, we do need a motion to kind of get this rolling. I would be absolutely open to that, lowering technician pharmacist costs. But, obviously those are a little bit of, go ahead, Maria.
I think that probably some more discussion needs to happen because I think several members of our board weren't around a couple of years ago when we did a whole fee audit of other professionals and what physicians, dentists, and other licensed healthcare categories, nursing, pay to look for equity across the healthcare arena. So maybe that information would be helpful to include in the discussions about the individual licenses versus the facility licenses. I understand it is difficult because it is quite a bit, but I think we need to keep in mind what the other healthcare practitioners pay also.
Thanks, Maria. Desi?
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing maybe the change in fees over time. I'm not 100% sure about other healthcare professionals, but I mean, we're in a pretty unique position right now where the price or the wages in pharmacists are actually decreasing over time. And I'm not sure if that's true for other professionals, but maybe we can get that information. I think that would be useful to kind of see. Yeah, that's just echoing everything that both Jig and KK said.
So, Eileen and Ann, is there an opportunity for us to make the motion a little bit more broader so that we could try to still have a motion in place so we know where we are going in a bigger picture, but maybe we could discuss of some of the certain levels of certain fees and having more data available to members provided and some more possible comparisons?
I guess one of the questions that I would maybe, or a comment that I would maybe just throw out for the board's consideration, if it's helpful, is that there is a December board meeting for petition purposes, and perhaps this could be an agenda item there if the board would like to have additional information before it makes the decision.
I think that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, I think this just needs a much larger discussion.
Okay. Trevor?
Yes, just as a matter of legislative calendaring, knowing that the level of urgency and solvency of the board, the legislative session does start in December, and that is when a lot of the initial legislation will be introduced. And so if it is the intent of the board to move expeditiously on this, I would recommend kind of possibly taking the action that was just referenced of maybe advocating or perhaps moving forward with the broad scope of all of the fees, with the exception of I'm trying to think of language on the fly, but with special concern related to the increase of fees on pharmacists and pharmacist technicians. That way we can give staff the overall endorsement and guidance to pursue this and begin the process of finding a legislative author and sponsor so that when session comes up in December, we have the opportunity to move right from the beginning.
Thank you, Trevor. That was actually what I was going to try to suggest in some ways, but thank you for putting it so eloquently there. So that it would be my hope if that's possible, Eileen. Is there an opportunity to go that route? Because I really would like to um, pursue this as soon as possible, so we are not flat-footed with searching for author and going through all that legislative process.
Hi, President Oates. This is Eileen. I think what we can try is craft a motion that the board, if the board believes that adjustments to the fees are necessary, that they vote for a general policy increase, or somebody can move, to seek to sponsor legislation to address the board's fee levels, with some other guidance. I do think eventually we need to come with a specific proposal. So I think Ann's suggestion about having this discussion in December again, but I think you could go with a policy statement if the board so believes, based on the fee audit report, that we move to sponsor legislation to change the board's fee, authorization to address, the financial condition of the board, and then in line with the proposal that are in the materials, but with the proviso that we're going to look at pharmacy technician and pharmacist license fees to make sure that cost is not a barrier. And did you have any other thoughts?
No, so I was trying to type, Eileen, while you were talking. So a potential motion, I think, could be to pursue a statutory change to amend Business and Professions Code 4400 to adjust fee levels to address financial conditions of the board in line with recommendations included in the meeting materials, while allowing additional discussion on the pharmacy technician renewal and pharmacist renewal. I think I captured it, but let me know.
The only
Good job.
the only thing
Trevor.
added there is to seek a sponsor, just like what Trevor was saying, so be to initiate, to sponsor changes. But otherwise, I like that.
Trevor?
So moved.
Great, thank you. Anyone second, Trevor? Thank you, Jesse. Do we need to add the potentially also adjusting institutional licenses as discussed? Because if we're lowering pharmacists and pharmacy technicians, we might need an opportunity to be able to increase other sections. Is that included in the motion, Anne?
I did not. I focused on the technician renewal and the pharmacist renewal.
Okay, because if we lower something, we have to have an opportunity to increase others. So we might have to add a language if Trevor's agreeable and Jesse's agreeable to add a language to look at institutional fees.
I would be okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. Do you want to recite it one more time? You are so good at this. Just came up with that on the fly.
Okay, so here's where I think we are. Motion to pursue a statutory change to amend Business and Professions Code Section 4400 to adjust fee levels to address financial conditions of the board in line with recommendations included in the meeting materials, while allowing additional discussion on pharmacy technician renewal and pharmacist renewal, and to offset reductions with increases in facility fees.
Sounds good to me. Okay. We will go for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. I think no public comment. Okay, we're ready for a vote. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Jake, how do you vote?
Yes.
Renee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Trevor. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, KK. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Kula. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Ricardo. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes. The motion passes. And Jesse, sorry, and if you could just make sure that if we could provide what the members were kind of requesting for December meeting in anticipation of that. Hopefully we'll have more details and we'll have also better projection and some numbers we can show in our December meeting so we could have that done by December so we can pursue something next year. All right, moving on to next agenda item is future meeting dates. Attachment 5 includes the meeting calendar for the remainder of 22 as well as dates for 2023. Please mark those dates. There are a few changes and there may be additional meetings coming up for Enforcement Committee as well as Standard of Care Committee. So just a heads up. And now we're ready for public comment on that section.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Sarah. That concludes my report, and I am going to next agenda item for Anne's report, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's been long, so I'll try to keep it brief for you. With respect to the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the most notable thing to highlight is that the governor has announced that the state of emergency will end February 28th. So we will begin our messaging. We have our first message going under review right now and hope to release. We want to make sure that licensees are aware of this and the potential impacts to their operations moving forward. So there will be communications offered by both DCA as well as the board. We'll continue to use our subscriber alert system and our website as the main communication venues, and then be reaching out to our association partners as well. So with respect to that, there are still some broad waivers that remain in effect. They are detailed in the meeting requirements. As we discussed, the remote processing waiver does remain in effect until March 30th of 2023, which was one of the items that was discussed yesterday. We have done a number of site-specific waivers, and we also approved a number of mobile pharmacies, which is consistent with our authority under 4062. So we have been reaching out to a number of the entities that requested authority to use those mobile pharmacies, mobile pharmacies, to check in on the status of those. So looking forward to getting those responses back to understand how they're still being used. With respect to the sunset review, when the board went through its sunset review process last time, it did request that there be an annual review of the status of the report. So what is included in attachment 1 is portions of the report. So some of the narrative doesn't really change from report to report because the information is kind of, static, but there's the data in there as well. I would suggest it's kind of lengthy. When we do the formal report, it will be formatted nicely. I promise it's not going to be in the questionnaire format, but this is really to let members see where we are, how we're moving forward. The new issues is probably going to be the one that we'll need to spend some time on, but I would recommend that we don't focus on that until we're closer to submitting our final report, which we don't know definitively, but we anticipate will be the end of 2024 or early 2025. Also included in there are the passing scores for the CPJE and the NAPLEX. We do report out this information twice a year. So attachment 2 includes that aggregate information. You will notice that there has been a slight increase in the passing rate for the CPJE. Also, I wanted to just quickly highlight some of the presentations that have been provided. over the last quarter. We are going to be hosting again a prescription drug abuse prevention, what a pharmacist should know training that will be in early November. And then we have some outreach activities that we talked about. The Communication Public Education and the board really talked about, trying to reach out and developing some campaigns. So there's a little bit of information on there just so that you're aware that we did it, and would anticipate that as part of the next Communication and Public Education Committee meeting, we can kind of talk through how those campaigns worked and get member feedback so we can implement potentially different approaches moving forward. And that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for just running through your report. You didn't have to rush. We have, so with that, that concludes all the items before we have a petitions, which it is 11:50, so we will take a lunch breaks until one. Hi, Eileen. Yes.
Going to open up a public comment for the executive officer report.
Sure. Yes. Sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Thank you. Yes, please. All right, with that, sorry. We're just gonna take a lunch break until 1 o'clock. That's when the judge is available. So we'll start at 1 o'clock with our petitions. And so we'll be back. See you all at 1 o'clock, please. 1 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch, everyone.